Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Medical Devices, Unique Challenges on the Way to Market. My name is Ryan Muse, and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. I'd like to thank Aerofast, who developed the content for this presentation. Aerofast is helping MedTech startups get to their next milestone. Their in-house team of 220 engineers helps startups from planning to developing their device and making sure it's certified for the targeted market. And now I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers for today's event. Igor is the head of Aerofast. Over his 25-year-long business career, Igor has built his profile in high-tech startups that went from forming a new concept to commercialization in niche industrial, engineering, and medical markets. His competencies are mainly in business, machine building, software, and medical device development. Matej Gasparin is the Director of Engineering for Medical Services at Aerofast. With a strong technical background in control systems engineering and statistical signal processing, he is leading the engineering teams focused on providing cutting-edge software and hardware engineering services for medical devices. Nico van Tikkelen is founder and chief executive officer of VIPUN Medical. He has over 18 years' experience in clinical research, sales, and marketing in the medical device industry. And Stephen Toe, the Chief Executive Officer of Leo Cancer Care. Toe has a successful track record of delivering the most innovative products in radiotherapy, having led development teams in the completion and release of the Elekta Unity MRI guided radiotherapy system. And so now, without further ado, I would like to hand the mic over to our first speaker, Igor Rogel. You may begin when ready.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. I would also like to thank Stephen, Matej, and Nico to participate, to provide their contribution. First of all, let's look at the companies that participated in this event. First of all, Aerofast. We are MedTech, medical device engineering company who help MedTech startup develop and certify their medical devices. We're part of COSILab, which is a control software company, and maybe a bit more, Matej, if you could provide some insight of what specifically we do.
Yeah, thank you, Igor, for the word. So hello, everyone. Yes, as introduced, our company, COSILab company, is specialized in complex software development for various applications, big physics experiments, and lately our focus has been medical device development. So apart from our own custom solutions that we provide, we have a strong department which is focusing on providing engineering as a service. So, and this is the story behind Aerofast and our mission. So providing in-house development teams to startup companies, and we cover all the aspects of engineering, so from software to hardware and system engineering, risk management, and so on. So the companies that we are working, that we have invited to join, two of our partners are VIPUN and Leo Cancer Care. So I thank both of them, the guys, and I'm handing over the word to Nico.
Thank you, Matej. So just a quick word of introduction on VIPUN Medical. We are a Belgian startup engaged in improving medical nutrition care for critically ill patients. We are developing a new type of feeding tube, which you can see here on the slide, and the control unit, which allows physicians to continuously monitor the stomach function of critically ill patients. So by means of the balloon that you can see on the feeding tube, and you can see an image of the balloon placed into the stomach, as the stomach contracts upon this balloon, we can measure the pressure inside of the balloon, and we can tell physicians whether the stomach is working normally, yes or no. And in that regard, we can give physicians advice whether it is safe to start enteral nutrition for these very sick, critically ill patients. Now, on top of that, because the balloon has a specific size and shape and pressure, as you can see it there in the stomach at the right bottom of the screen, it is not so easy for the patient to remove the tube. Let's say a patient wakes up from a coma and starts pulling the tube. Actually, in a standard tube, it's quite easy to remove that. So with our balloon, and the balloon which has a specific size, it actually secures the position of the feeding tube inside the stomach and continuously monitors that. So overall, our ambition is to help physicians and nurses to avoid feeding intolerance by feeding at the right time, to avoid feeding tube misplacement, and in that way having better fed critically ill patients with less amount of complications. Over to Stephen.
Thanks, Nico. Great to be involved in this as well. So as you said, I'm Stephen Toe, the CEO of Leo Cancer Care. And Leo Cancer Care is really founded with one goal in mind, to bring a more human way to deliver radiation therapy. And if we look at radiation therapy in the way it's delivered today, it's typically delivered with a patient lay flat on their back, while a large machine that weighs anything from 6 tons to 600 tons rotates around patients, delivering radiation beams from different angles. And having those two things, having this patient lay flat on their back and having a rotating machine, has given rise to the systems that we see today that are both very large and both very expensive. And in many cases, according to a lot of research from institutions like MD Anderson and MGH, don't necessarily provide all of the clinical benefits for some key indications. So at Leo Cancer Care, instead of treating patients lay flat on their back, we treat them in the upright orientation, and that's really for clinical reasons. And rather than rotating a machine that can be up to 600 tons around a static patient that's 100 kilos, we instead flip the whole scenario on its head, keep the radiation fixed, and instead slowly rotate the patient instead. And by doing that, we significantly reduce the size, the cost, and the complexity of radiation therapy today. So that's Leo Cancer Care in a nutshell. And I'll hand it back to you, Igor.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Nico. It's great to see that two MedTech CEO being right into the thick of it, developing their medical devices, bringing them to market. Of course, we are very proud to be able to support you in this great endeavor. And I don't know, where do we start? We have here the audience, I guess, there are MedTech startup CEOs, CTOs, medical device professionals to be, I guess. Hopefully we can share with them some insights into this industry, how all it is done right there on the ground. So I don't know where to start. Nico, you may have some ideas of some thoughts of where a new startup should focus on and what they anticipate as they go along, what challenges they will be facing.
Absolutely. So every startup, I think, starts with an idea. Yeah, there is this one person who has this great idea and think that's going to be the next successful product in the market. And an idea is fine, but getting the idea to market is a long way, okay? And you can take different routes, but in the end, I mean, once you have the idea, what I would advise is start to make a proof of concept early. Make a prototype, okay? Make a prototype of your device. In our case, in VIPUN Medical, our prototype was a standard feeding tube, which we bought from any company producing feeding tubes. Our idea was, okay, you know, let's add a balloon on top of that feeding tube and see if we can measure the stomach function. So that's exactly what we did. We took some balloons, and they weren't actually really medical balloons. They were just a plastic bag, which we glued on top of that. And we started doing experiments with that. We started doing experiments in a controlled way, okay? So you need to be sure that every time either the animals or the humans you do the experiments on are safe. But this is a first way to start generating really tangible data. In our case, the first data were pressure readouts from the stomach. And as we could see those pressure readouts in different human beings, in different types of patients, we could show physicians, we could show investors, we could show potential partners to work with the potential of our device. We could show them that different people at different stages had a different amount of stomach motility, and that's actually the technology that we stand for. So our first advice for me is really, if you have an idea, try to build that into a prototype and do some studies with it. Try to build your proof of concept.
I hear you mentioned you involved clinical professionals in the proof of concept stage quite early on. That's, I guess, something that is particularly important. Huh?
It is absolutely crucial. You know, these people are probably going to be your final customers. So very early on in the process, you have to start talking to your final customers, yes? Everybody may have an idea. It may be the physician who actually sees the need in the market. It may be the engineer in a company or at the university who's working on another technology and thinks, well, this could be used for another type of functionality as well. So at the moment you start to think that, go to your future customers and discuss with them the possibilities that you see. But all in all, they may see more than you actually see. And this is also how we started it. You know, we said we put a balloon on that feeding tube and we start measuring the pressure, and the stomach is contracting to push the food forward. We start measuring that. And then one physician told us, well, that's all great, and I think this is great, but with your balloon, can you also ensure that the feeding tube stays inside the stomach? Because my biggest problem is feeding tube misplacement, people pulling out our feeding tubes. Voila, there you go. We had our second technology. We had our second differentiating factor versus the current technologies on the market.
Maybe Stephen can add his own view on to Nico. Of course, bearing in mind that the complexity of your device is, I would say, by the order of magnitude or two greater than Nico's. But I'm sure you have your own view of where you start with the complex devices as yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, irrespective of complexity, all complex ideas can be broken down into, you know, much smaller concepts, and you can start from there. But I completely agree with Nico that if you've got an idea that you think is going to make a difference in the healthcare space, the first thing you've got to be able to do is then go and get feedback on people that you see will actually use your device. Because, you know, it's all well and good coming up with an idea, and as engineers and physicists, we do it a lot. But you've got to actually involve the people that are going to use this as a product to validate your thinking, your assumptions, but also absolutely to get their input to make your idea even better. You're never going to sit inside an office and create a medical device. You've got to get out there to the people that are going to use it and drive the conversation. I completely agree again with Nico that the easiest way to facilitate that conversation and really get feedback is to build something. And, you know, even though our device is a radiation therapy system, it's one of the more complicated medical devices. It still started, and the first phase for us was to go into a hospital with a load of cardboard boxes and alignment lasers to represent the radiation beam and create something, you know, for maybe $1,000 it cost us in total to build the very first prototype. But it allowed us to get people in there and get the ideas to drive the development further.
Yeah. Yeah, with a complex device, the proof of concept prototype must be quite a sizable one as well. So I bet you had to fund that at first place, which I guess was a bit of a challenge, I'm sure, because it's without a real thing in your hand. Yeah.
It is, but again, you have to break it down to the easiest possible implementation. So for us, you know, as I said, we're rotating a patient. That's the main real differentiator, the main difference in our technology. And we're doing that with the patient in the upright position. But you don't have to go and build something that is a full patient positioning system for clinical use. Our first proof of concept was a simple office chair that implemented the same and had the same functionality, just on a much lower fidelity prototype version. And you can do that. Nico was saying about getting not surgical balloons, but just standard balloons and building the same thing. Even for the very most complex device, there'll still be a first proof of principle that is low fidelity. And you use that, if you're looking to raise investment, it's much easier if somebody can come and see something rather than you just talking about a concept. So I think start at the very bare bones and really try and dig down into what your concept is and how you can implement that in the easiest, fastest possible way.
I guess.
Sorry. It's a bit like being an architect, right? If you're an architect and you engage into a competition for a very fancy building in Dubai, you're not only talking about the building, you're actually building a small model of it and then taking that to the people you have to sell it to. And even if it's made out of cardboard, that's fine. But one picture or one image says more than 1,000 words, so that will help you in getting the job done.
Yeah. I find the stories, personally find the stories like yours, Nico, and yours, Steven, really inspiring. And it's amazing to collaborate with individuals and companies like yours. But can you maybe comment on this fact? I find it interesting. Once you have this proof of concept, this is a very rough prototype, right, to show. But then what is the transition from having this, using non-clinical parts of equipment and home-written software, the transition from that towards an actual medical device that will be certified at the end and safe, of course, and approved for clinical use? I think that is quite a challenge for several companies out there.
Correct, and there is kind of a flipping point, right? Because you're working in a lab and you're making a prototype, but all the work you do there, you're probably not going to use when you stand in front of the FDA or a European notified body and you're defending your case on getting a regulatory approval. So as from a certain point in time, you have to decide, I have this prototype, my product is, this is what it's going to be. I can still make small modifications, but from now on, I'm going to start working in a quality management system, okay? And I'm not talking about the financing yet, because, to build a quality management system that costs money, or you need to get engaged with the right partners. But it's about, from a certain moment, you have to say, okay, as from now on, when I do my development, I work in a quality management system, otherwise everything I do is lost. All costs that I make, all investments that I make, I will have to do again to later on use again with the FDA. And maybe an example from VIPUN, we have done 3 healthy volunteer studies with our device. We have done 1 critically ill patient study with our device, and we will probably not use any of this data in our regulatory application. We will have to do other clinical studies done within the right framework and use those data in the regulatory submission. Unfortunately, that's what it is, right? So you have to be very conscious about until when am I freewheeling, and when is it getting serious, and I'm starting to work in this QMS. I don't know how that was with you, Stephen, with this very large device.
Yeah, I think the quality management system is very, very important. And I would always say, when it comes to developing, and you're specifically asking here, Matteo, about getting something to market, and I think there's a very clear and very important distinction about making something which you can do very easily and getting something to market, because it involves an awful lot more than that. And that's exactly what Nico's saying really there, that you can make something that works, and that's fine. It's a case of doing the engineering, but to get something out there through a regulatory approval process, and more importantly, actually get somebody to buy it, is a much, much bigger question. And you asked the question, you know, how do you get something to market? I think from the engineering perspective, we're talking about these loops of building various different bits that have slightly more maturity in them, and the engineering life cycle there is fairly well understood. This idea of getting user requirements, really high level things that define what your product must be, breaking them down into engineering requirements, going and building and designing a product that meets those requirements, testing them, and then actually you know, having the product at the end of it. And you loop round that same cycle, building up and up and up in terms of the level of maturity of the product that you're making. So that's from an engineering perspective, but you've got to bring all of these other things in with that as well. So you've got to have the regulatory element, you've got to have the sales, the marketing, all of these different components that have got to come in before you can successfully get something to market. And it is very different from just building the nuts and bolts of a product.
Maybe worthwhile adding, getting something to market, of course, the key milestone is, let's say in Europe, is CE marking. And in order to get that regulatory approval, what all that you have said has to be documented. All those steps, the regulatory environment, the regulatory framework is so rigid, and I mean rigid, so in depth, that really requires you to start with QMS early on, so that you diligently record all your development steps. Roka, head of compliance, made a great statement one day. He said, the performance and safety of a medical device is, how did he put it? It's ensured by the process of its development. So the regulatory framework is actually set down in such a way to really drive two parameters. One is the performance. You always need to check that you're performing what you wanted to perform as, and then make sure that the device is safe. And that goes all the way through the process of development, which I think it's evident in the paperwork that is produced as part of the development. I'm sure Matej is breathing, eating, sleeping that sort of documentation, and we've done a lot of that. I mean, I've asked my engineers once, how much time do you actually spend on writing the papers? And they said, okay, let's put it that way. For medical device software, we spend about 10% of the time code writing and about 60% of the time writing the papers. So I don't know, what's your view on that ratio?
Yeah, it's about maybe from my perspective or comment, it's something like that. But what we have learned very early on in the process of building our engineering competences is that we need especially dedicated teams and engineers who are versatile and experienced with this, with either building up QMS systems, or we have our own QMS at COSELab which we can use. So we have really specialists for these areas, because we acknowledged what kind of a challenge it is. However, once you go through this cycle a few times, either by different QMS systems set up by different companies, but at the end, they all implement the same standards, right? You build a lot of experience, and this experience that then you build up is very, very valuable. And then it makes the whole process less intimidating.
It also reduces your risk, right? If a person from scratch starts to build a quality management system, that person doesn't have the experience. And you know, I've seen that, and people reading ISO 13485 and starting from the actual ISO document to build a quality management system. Unfortunately, you're never going to succeed if you do it like that. You need to build up your expertise in that area, having seen different possibilities of quality management systems, and get experience in making it efficient, making it workable, but also making it qualityful as well. And that is absolutely crucial. And I can relate to the timing on the documentation, absolutely.
And I think the key thing there, building on what you're saying, Nico, I think for anybody starting a medical device startup company, QMS is one example, but there are many, many others where you really do need to be an expert in that particular area to do the QMS development. And you can't typically be an expert in quality management system and the core engineering competencies that you're going to need to design and develop your products, and in the business development elements to go out there, develop the markets, find the customers, have all of that interaction. You're never going to be the person that does all of those. So I think that the key to this, and the QMS is one of the ones I would really focus on, because it can be so costly if you get it wrong, where, find somebody who knows the quality management system side well, work with a partner to help you build that side of your business out, because you can't do all of those things in the level of depth that you need.
Yeah, I can imagine that being in particular important in a complex device where you have a lot of components on the engineering side, and then you need to verify all of those, then the validation at the end, putting it all in writing so that you have it ready for certification, absolutely essential. And on top of that, I think the mentality of ensuring that everyone in the design team is all along thinking of safety. Safety for the patient needs to be embodied in an organization, and of course documented in QMS, because this is probably one most important thing that the regulators will be looking to ensure that that part of the development has been covered properly. Also, when you were talking before about Stephen, about talking to the clinicians early on, talking to the market, it's effectively people who you want the feedback from are actually the people who will be buying from you, I guess. And in proton and radiation therapy market, maybe there is not that many clinics, as in the case of Unico, but still this early engagement with the clinics is probably essential. How did you go about choosing which clinic you're going to speak to? How did you go about opening the doors? What was the ticket that made you get those doors open and get into the discussion? Is that
it's a very good question. And I think before I answer that specifically, I think there's there are three different types of customer, I would say, or categories: the users, the people that are actually using your device; the choosers, the people that are actually choosing which device the hospital buys; and then there's the payers, the people that are actually making the final buying decisions and paying for your device. And you've got to understand, for your device in particular, who those people are and what really drives them to make their decisions. It's not just about taking your early prototype in, putting it in front of them and letting them play with it. It's also about trying to get as much interaction as you can with all three of those categories of people and understand what drives them. And usually, people from my experience, people are very, very open to working with you. If people work within the healthcare system and they work in healthcare networks, they do it because they're passionate about driving a better future for healthcare. So if you come along with a product that is, truly innovative and really offers an opportunity to improve the quality of healthcare, most people that you will get in touch with will want to help you out. If they don't have an interest in working with you, maybe that suggests either that your product needs some work, or your way of describing your product and getting across its value needs some work. But getting into healthcare networks and speaking to people and finding some time is relatively easy.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you mentioned different stakeholders in the clinical world that you speak to. I bet the the discussion or the talk, the arguments, the points that you're discussing with the insurer who pays for the treatment ultimately will be very different to the topics discussed with the clinician or the nurse who is going to be using the system. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. The way that you frame it, the way that you forget about the topic of discussion with being different with those people, but the way that you talk about your product has to be very different in all three of those cases. So again, you're going to struggle going through those discussions without having first a broad understanding of your product and how it's going to impact the market. So I would always suggest, and the very first thing that we did with Leo Cancer Care was look at a standard business model canvas and all of the different components within that. And if you can get a very solid understanding of all of the different elements of a business model canvas, then you can probably have a good conversation with all three of those different user groups, because you'll understand the value that you're bringing in all of those different areas. So that would always be my starting point for a medical device.
Yeah, so effectively, when you look at the product you try to sell, you should say, in a way, not think about product as such, but rather try to put forward the solution of improving the care for the patients. That means it's not just the device, in your case, the upright assisting position device, but also about how it's going to be integrated in their existing systems, how it's going to be integrated in their workflows, what are the benefits for the nurse, what are the benefits for the patient, what are the benefits for the doctors.
Absolutely. We as engineers and physicists love the technology. That's why we get into engineering and physics. We'll happily sit and talk about the nuts and bolts of how our machines work all day long if people will listen to us. They don't very often want to listen to us, but if they did, then we'll sit and talk about them all day, But whether it's talking to investors or customers, even, in fact, very few of them care as much as you do about the nuts and bolts and how your technology works. Investors, customers alike, they care on the value that you are creating in their world. How are you going to make my life easier? How are you going to deliver better treatments to the patient? What's the value that's being created? That's the key. And that's the key, I think, between going from being an engineer or being a physicist to being somebody who can really lead a company forward. It's understanding the value that you're creating with your innovation.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Stephen, on that, and I cannot agree more. The only thing I can add to that is do it in the right order. So first talk with your engineers in your group. What do you think the device is going to be? Then have an open conversation with the customers, which would be the physicians, the nurses, maybe even the patients. And only when you understand that, then you go to the potential investors. If you go to the potential investors first, they're going to ask lots of questions, and they're going to scrutinize your business case, and you won't have responses. But when you've talked to customers, you'll be able to check that box too.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a few useful tips for the MedTech startups when they go and pitch to the VC funds and other investors. Is there any? What sort of route did you take? Did you seek funding from VCs, seed investors? Nico is, if it's not the secret, of course. Yeah.
No, it is absolutely not a secret. So we went to the venture capital funds, first in Belgium and then internationally. And it always takes longer than you think. Honestly, I thought we would have our funding in about 9 to 12 months. And at the beginning of that timeline, we already had a good dossier. So I was thinking 9 to 12 months should be okay. It took us a little bit less than 2 years. Now, by the time people really get interested, if one person is really interested, you'll get a second one, a third one, and then suddenly everybody is interested. And we were lucky enough to be able to partner with actually a company, with Baxter Healthcare. So in the end, we didn't get a VC funding round, but we have our first customer signed in already, and this provides the necessary funding to develop the product into the clinical studies.
So you could say you actually got a strategic investor as opposed to a VC fund then?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, lucky for you. That's great. Early on sale. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so our experience when... Sorry.
It's not easy, right? These investors, they ask you all of the questions that first of all, you don't have an answer to. So don't go to the most important investors first. Yeah. First, do some tryouts so you can fail safe. And then you go to the more important ones, and you will notice you think you have a good study the first 2-3 times that you go. And you will notice that in your 20th, 30th, and 40th conversation, your story is a lot better than the second or the third time. Definitely.
I'm sure the listeners will remember to start with the back when they go to the investors. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Stephen, that's correct, huh?
Absolutely. It's, I mean, it's again, being a physicist by training, it's certainly a baptism of fire. Getting into the investment community, and I completely agree with Nico. I went into my first pitch with the feeling, yes, my story is really strong here, and typical, you know, exactly as I'm talking about, I spent the majority of my time explaining to these investors how cool my technology was, and look how it moves this way, and look how it moves that way. How interesting is that? And less, you know, the last couple of minutes saying, oh, and by the way, it's going to make you money in this way. And it's going to bring this value to customers, crammed into the last couple of minutes. And you've got to completely turn that on its head. You need a description of your technology that you can explain to an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old, and they both understand it. And then you need a very, very clear description of how this is a business, not just a cool piece of technology.
Sure.
And the other one bit of real advice I would give to people going out and trying to raise investment for their technology is, in the same way, you know, go and ask anybody who makes investments personally, and they'll talk about diversifying their investments. So you go and invest in lots of different sectors so that you spread your risk. I would always encourage people to try and do exactly the same with the investors that they bring on board. Don't go and find all investors from one country that operate in one specific way, because you're putting all your eggs in one basket. If you can, and you can get investment from different countries and different areas, so strategics, maybe some angels, maybe some VCs, it gives you a way of being able to pull from various different categories when you need to go and raise your second or third round. So it increases your network and your availability for follow-on capital.
Fully agree, Stephen, with that. And also, each of these people that you talk to, they come with a network. So expand your network internationally. And this is actually how we got in touch with Cozy Lab, through a Swiss investor we were talking to. So this is how I get to be here.
Maybe it's worthwhile adding, we many times get questions from our startups, you know, how to approach, which VC funds to approach. And it's in medical device field, there's one rule I would put forward, is the vast majority, I'm going to say 95% of VC funds would not even touch medical devices, because the development cycle is so long that they would expect an exit between 3 to 5 years. But in the case of Stephen, I guess your development cycle may be quite a bit longer, same for Nico. And a lot of what you should really be looking for is a VC fund that is focused in medical fields, MedTech, and that's the best bet. Otherwise, you may be wasting time.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and you know, there's enough people to speak to, and there's a lot of, you know, there are still a lot of MedTech VCs out there. You want to very, very quickly whittle down the list so that you've got, you know, only the people that are realistically going to be interested in your technology that you're pitching to. Otherwise, you'll just be spending far too much time spending people that are never going to be interested in your technology.
How did you find where on the scale was IP protection in the eyes of the investors, or how did you approach IP protection? Nico, maybe.
Yeah, really high, obviously. If you don't protect your technology, then it's hard to sell your investment case, because then everybody can copy whatever technology you have. And for us, it was not only about having that one patent application, right, or that one patent approval. We actually have 2 patents and a third on the way. On top of that, we had a strategy to protect our know-how, which is not safeguarded in our patents, but which we keep secret for us, and which we will implement in our control unit together with Cozy Lab in a very protected way. So it's not just about waiving the patent paper, and definitely this is a topic that has to be covered in every investor presentation.
And there's also a balance between what to patent and what to use a straight secret. So as soon as you submit a patent, it's in the public domain. So
if you put it in the patent, it's there for everybody to read, and especially with software or smart applications, that's an important one. So maybe you want to describe the general principle in your patent and keep the details secret.
Yeah. So on the clinical side, how do you see, in your case, Stephen, for example, how long do you think it's going to take from when you decided, or you're going to put the QMS together, you finish the proof of concept? How long do you think that it's going to take to sell your first unit to a clinic, to a real clinic, not just for, let's say, research or testing?
Yeah. So again, we're a considerable way through our route now, but a typical kind of guideline, I would say, depending on the complexity, the device, the risk classification from a regulatory perspective, I think if you can get from start to finish within 7 years, you've done very, very well. 7 to 10 is more reasonable.
Mm-hmm. So that's for a complex device like yours. So where on that scale you are at? You're about 5 years into your development now?
About 4 years. Yeah. And we will be installing our first preclinical units at the end of this year. So we're about on the same track as I was just saying there, as a realistic guideline.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so well on the way, I guess. Yeah.
Well on the way. We're at the exciting point where you see everything come together in a production representative unit. You spend so much time looking at images and talking to people about your technology. This is just the most, it's the most wonderful part of it, where it actually comes together and you start working on getting that into a hospital. There's nothing in the world that beats that feeling.
Absolutely. That I can just picture it. I've been in machine building long enough, and I know how it is. You develop a new machine, test it out all fine, you put it there in the production line, integrated with the rest. There's always at the end, when you do the commissioning, there's always something wrong, and all the heads come together. How we do all the troubleshooting and finish that one off. But MedTech could certainly give us a lot of insight into that commissioning sort of frenzy, I guess.
Yeah, I completely understand, and I can relate to your story, Stephen. Even more from my perspective, we even have the benefit of collaborating with several companies. So we have the chance, and our teams, when we collaborate with our partners, with startups, the teams always engage with them, and we join their cause, right? In a way. So basically, we have a benefit of having the opportunity to go through this process several times, and each time we also share this passion. and excitement of seeing a new device being launched on the market, a new device in the clinical environment, and it's a very rewarding feeling.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
So,
and
Nico,
therefore,
sorry.
I just wanted to conclude that I'm looking forward to seeing your devices, your radiation machine and the VIPUN gastric monitoring device in clinical environment very soon. Yes, sorry.
And properly validated. Nico, how far into your development cycle are you? You probably started, what, 3 years back or so?
Yeah, 3 to 4 years back, the work started at the university. So there's been already 4 years into the development and clinical studies, as I said. And we expect to need another 3 years to get into the market.
Okay. Yeah, so it's quite typical. I mean, rarely you would find a medical device that would be brought to market in less than 5 years from the moment you find out or find the idea and start it. So that's certainly quite typical. And this brings us back to the point of investors. They need to be prepared to invest for the long run. But of course, the benefits can be quite considerable, because once you've gone through certification, that for you is kind of a safety net, barriers to competitive entry, for example, in your field to a degree. I'm sure, Stephen, in your case, you've got a pretty decent selling or value that you can bring to the clinic by the upright position. If we look, for example, in proton therapy, where most of the cost actually goes into this huge gantry that turns the beam around, and your concept is a considerable cost saving for this modality, or we'll say this type, this approach to radiation treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I could talk for many hours about our technology, but our value proposition has changed significantly over the years. We originally focused, because as I mentioned right at the start, rotating patients rather than rotating machines brings 2-3 times reduction in the cost of proton therapy. So that was our focal point originally from a value proposition perspective. But only when we started going out to people and talking to people out in the market did our value proposition change, or the focus on our value proposition changed, where people said, okay, well, reducing cost is great, but what's the clinical value? What's the clinical benefit to go along with this as well? And it's that really brought in our work, and our study of the literature from places like MD Anderson and Northwestern, MGH, that showed actually a lot of significant clinical benefit to treating patients upright rather than lay down. So actually then that became the focal point of our value proposition, because we're also bringing the clinical benefit along with this at the same time. So just understanding what people want out there is incredibly important in terms of the way that you frame your value proposition.
So putting this value proposition forward in the clinical world, I'm sure you have thought carefully in terms of how you build up your management team, how you populate your advisory board. When I look at your team, I'm always impressed of what a weight your advisory team pulls, and I'm absolutely certain that is probably one of the key aspects or the key ways of how you get into the right clinics with the right message, and how you open the doors to your market, really.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it comes back to the point that Nico mentioned earlier, and we talked about earlier, about not being the person that does everything. And you can't be the person that knows how to develop a product and necessarily be, the scientific expert, the one that has got the big name in the industry and brings a lot of attention to the company in that way. And you've got to partner, you've got to bring on partners and work with people in those areas. And the scientific advisory board for us, I mean, we're incredibly fortunate. They're the biggest names without a doubt in our industry and real thought leaders. So they bring a lot of value. But so finding those partners to work with, I think is one of the keys really to success.
Maybe I could add to that, and because this is actually my one single biggest advice. If you want to go to the next slide, Ryan, my single biggest advice is to fill the gaps in your contributor. The next one, contributor expertise map. And as Stephen said, your medical advisory board is really important. But I mean, this is the VIPUN medical expertise map, and I'm at the middle there together with the CTO, and all of these teams around, all of these positions, you have to fill. You cannot do everything at once. I'm not an expert in every of these items, but you have to find the right person, the right company, the right team to do that. So for us, you can see we've added 2 team members, a clinical project manager and a VP product development. But all around us, we get advice, we get support, we get work done by all of these people around. Not in the least by the product development team, chief medical officer, the clinical research teams. And maybe just as the last one, this also helps you to understand what kind of expertise you need to get, right? It's not only about seeing who you need to sign up with, but it's also about, hey, oh yes, I need to think about marketing as well. Yeah, I need to think about sales already today. I shouldn't forget about my customers. Make this plan. Put some names on the plan, company names, people's names. It will help you move forward.
So, I mean, it's a great slide here. Really shows the breadth of different stakeholders or companies, personalities you need to get in on board to really move in the field of medical devices. If you look today, for example, which of those circles cause you most trouble? I bet there are a few.
Till today, I would say that's the VC investors. They cause us more trouble. But since that box is ticked right now, we are focusing most on the product development right now and the clinical research. But I wouldn't say they're causing trouble. I would say they're finding solutions and they're helping us a lot to move forward.
So the glass can be either half full or half empty. It's half full in your case. Good.
For me, it's always half full.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so Stephen, what is your today's biggest worry? Yeah.
Well, the biggest, I think on those biggest worry would be, just the prioritization and balance of all of those things. Any one of those things, exactly as Nico said, any one of those things you can handle. But it's about kind of balancing them all and having, that's why you have the right people on board that are the experts that can help with that prioritization. But it's the balance of all of those things and dealing with them is the challenge. But the real one piece of advice I would give to startup companies would be to move away from this idea. I got this image on here that shows this idea of a very big expanse of water to have to cross, and the same thing applies with, you often see it with a canyon and trying to get across there as well. Getting away from this idea, this typical kind of old-fashioned almost way of thinking that you go, right, I've got an idea today. I'm going to go out, I'm going to raise money, I'm going to find people that want to fund my idea, then I'm going to go and build my product. It will work first time, and then that's it. I'm over. That's success that sits on the other side, and we can all celebrate in how well we've done making this medical device. But now it's very, very hard to get people to invest in something where you come and say, exactly as you said, Igor, I'm going to now take 7 years to build something, and maybe in 7 years there'll be some revenue that comes out of the end of it. That whole mentality is outdated and very difficult to find people to invest in. So I would encourage people to take the idea that you get in day one, really dig into it and find where the innovation lies, and ask yourself, is there a product or a way I can generate revenue from that core innovation in a simpler way? You know, is it for medical devices, can I release something in the animal market? Or can I find a partner that also needs this innovation and make revenue by using, you know, something on a smaller scale first, raise much less money, build that smaller little bit, and release the first product that you can generate some revenue. Then do the same. Ask yourself exactly the same question and try and build stepping stones to get you to the end point. That would be my really big piece of advice. Think outside the box, to use a cliche, with the way that you build up your product and build up the value, more importantly.
Stephen, I can't agree more. The startup that is going to raise funding is going to have so much more weight if they can show that they have generated some profit, some revenue, or a revenue at least. Because that credibility really does matter. Credibility of, yes, I have already sold, and that whatever it is, even if it's not a medical device, it's already out there in the market, and that makes wonders with VC funds. That's for sure. Yeah. Matej, if you had to make one advice to a startup, what do you think? Medical device startups, what would you suggest to them to focus on?
I would build on the ideas outlined by Nico and Steven. So basically, what already they outlined is that how to approach this complex procedure of building and launching a medical device is by applying some structure and breaking it down, either in concrete smaller steps or identifying all the competencies that you need and map it to your current organization or startup company, or most importantly, identifying where are your weak spots. So some systematic approach, and by this, of course, I see it as an engineering and device engineering as one of these candidates, which is relatively easy to find to outsource, harder to find competent partners, and so my advice would be, identify what competences you need in-house, or you maybe already have in-house, and which ones are the ones that you need to provide but are not critical and crucial, and your market differentiator in a way, so that you can rely on on outside partners also. I think that by applying the systematic approach and can greatly reduce all the risks that you have on your path.
Matej, I would see the very similar thought process on the management side, away from engineering. On the management side, that is very much the case. The management has to, first of all, find the right skills within the management team. They need to really look for the right advisors or non-executives who can open doors, who can help them out with advice, experience, reputation. Because it really is the management team that is by far the most important criteria for VCs to invest in. So we see many times, we see startups that are great on technology, maybe on clinical, but you really, without proper management, you just cannot pull such a complex story over 5, 7, 10 years to come to the market on with the product. So that's maybe one of my main advices that I would give to MedTech startups.
I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers, Nico Van Tickelen, Stephen Toe, Igor Rogel, and Matej Gasparin. We hope that you found the webinar informative, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very, very much for joining here, and we shall see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.